Support for User Defenders is provided by Adobe XD. Adobe XD reimagines how designers create user experiences for websites, mobile, and more. Try it free at userdefenders.com/XD.
Just start doing it. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to just start redesigning things for fun. If there's a website you hate, how could you design it better? If you want to add a little research, like a survey, and then redesign something based on survey results or anything like that, that's a good way of getting started. If you can't quite figure out how else to get your foot in the door, it just gives you practice thinking through problems like that, and it also gives you something to point to kind of as a portfolio piece of like something you've done, even if it's not something that actually goes into production. And you never know what could happen. Maybe those people could see it and like it.
Welcome to the User Defenders podcast, where we interview UX superheroes who fight for the users in order to inspire and equip you to do the same. And now, here's your host, Jason Ogle.
Greetings, User Defenders. Welcome to episode 54. I apologize that I forgot to mention on the previous episode that this will be the last official episode of the season. I have the great privilege of speaking to Becca Kennedy, PhD. So you know how a lot of times some of the superhero names that the creative guests have come up with have had doctor in it, because doctor has been synonymous with a lot of superheroes. Well, Becca Kennedy literally is a doctor, and so she could have easily used that in her moniker, but she didn't. So anyway, that she has a fun superhero name. I think you'll like it. So today is all about the importance of research, and Becca gives us a lot of encouragement on even doing it on a budget, which is very common often, especially if you're in a scrappy kind of startup environment. So a lot of excellent advice today and a great conversation with Becca Kennedy. As I mentioned, this is the last official episode of the season, but I am super excited to announce that I do have one more in the can that I cannot wait to bring you. It is with my UX and marketing superhero, Seth Godin, and that is launching on November 13th. So be sure to subscribe so you automatically receive it. It's so good. I want to share an iTunes review really quick before we jump into the interview. This one's short but sweet. This is from Alex DBK, and Alex DBK said 5 stars, great speakers, enough time to go deep, great value overall, dynamic too. Ooh, Alex, thank you so much. That's awesome. That's an awesome review. I'm so glad you enjoy the speakers and that you enjoy the depth. I've gone back and forth with the time of these episodes, and I just can't seem to be satisfied until I get nearly an hour out of my guests. So I'm so glad that you're finding that helpful. I hope you defenders too appreciate that. And, I am doing a little more editing these days, so I'm trying to sort of cut out a little bit of superfluous stuff. But anyway, I'm glad you enjoy it, and thanks for the support. Please, Defenders, if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and review on iTunes or Apple, what do they call it? Apple Podcasts, whatever it is. If you could do that for me, I would greatly appreciate it. You can do so simply by going to iTunes and typing in UX in the search engine. I think UD comes up right toward the top there. And or you can just go to userdefenders.com/review, and I think it'll take you to it. All right, I guess I need to do some user testing because I shouldn't be assuming this much as a UXer. Anyway, thanks so much for your support. Becca Kennedy is a human factors psychologist and a UX researcher and designer. After an academic career designing and evaluating healthcare training technology, she turned independent and co-founded a UX consulting company called Kinnison in 2015 out of Albany, New York. Currently, Becca is the UX designer for Agrilist, an agriculture tech startup based in Brooklyn. That sounds interesting. She also keeps busy with consulting projects and volunteering with organizations like AIGA, upstate New York. She was recently recognized by the Albany Business Review as a 40 Under 40 awardee. That's funny how that rhymed like that. Fun fact about Becca, she has 3 tattoos and they're all kind of nerdy. There's a symbolic nod to getting through a PhD program, a subtle Star Wars X-Wing, and a piece of the original Epcot branding in Walt Disney World. Welcome to User Defenders, Becca. I am super excited to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Jason. I forgot I gave that fact to you about my tattoos. That's awesome.
I love it. I'm so glad you did that. It's a fun icebreaker. That's why I ask for that. It's a neat way. And I am curious. Tell me about, if you would, I'd love to know what the symbolic nod to the PhD program is and where might that be?
Oh, yeah, totally. So that's my most visible tattoo on my forearm. It's a lilac. And the reason that's symbolic is I got it when I finished my PhD, and it kind of symbolizes that first sign of spring. I live in upstate New York, and if you live up here, you know that when you see lilacs bloom, like spring is finally here. But the idea there is that lilacs bloom stronger after a cold winter. Like you really need that freeze to bud and bloom. So I like the symbolism of that, and that I had to get through some maybe cold, chilly, dark times to bloom.
Oh, I really like that a lot. You are a deep person, Becca. I can already tell. Just putting that, that's on there for life now, and there's a lot of symbolism to that. And why psychology? Like, what was it about psychology that drew you in? Was it like, did you read a book early on that kind of drew you in, or did you have family members that had like a background, or what was it exactly?
Not at all. It was just kind of a hunch. So after taking my intro psychology course in high school, I was just like, yeah, this is cool. This is really cool to just start learning about like how the brain works. And of course, at the Psych 100 level, every example you get is just so cool and mind-blowing because you've never thought about like how memory works or how we become the people we are. And at a young age, kind of being introduced to that, I kind of ran with it. I did one summer, I worked for the psychiatric center in Albany. And that was also not for me. So, you see, there were a lot of things in life I tried and was like, nope, not quite. It would have been way too draining for me to do that kind of thing for a career. And then my senior year of college, I did some research about what I could do as a psychologist that was not clinical. And found industrial organizational psychology, or IO psychology. And took a course on that, mainly because I read in a careers book that you only needed a master's degree to practice as an IO psychologist, and I did not want to commit to a PhD at that time. And when I was taking that IO psychology course with Dr. Doreen Comerford, who I'm still actually in contact with, she's a wonderful woman, she had, I think, one class on what's called human factors psychology. One single class, so one day, where she talked about like the world around us and how it's designed, and how she showed an example of a vacuum cleaner she has where the on switch was like not visible when you're looking down at the vacuum.
Oh, God.
And this was about 2008. So user experience wasn't like, it existed in some forms, but I had certainly never heard of it. So human factors was the closest thing I'd heard to what would become my user experience career. And on a whim almost, decided I was going to go get a PhD in human factors. So I applied to some programs, ended up getting into a few, and I went to Old Dominion University for my PhD, which I decided on because, first of all, there are not that many human factors programs. Especially not those in psychology. There are some that are engineering, and like I told you, engineering was not for me. So when I went and visited, they were just showing all this really cool stuff they were doing with virtual environments or virtual reality, simulations, video games, and that just like blew my mind that you could do research on the human brain using that kind of technology and then use it in an applied setting. So when I joined that program, I ended up working in healthcare a ton. And in about 2011, 2012, I found UX. Somehow, I probably on Twitter or something. And I realized people were doing all this stuff that was similar to to human factors, but in more of like a consumer space as opposed to like a safety, healthcare, like critical context.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's where I was trying to get with all this, was like designing stuff, using psychology and using research and all that. So is that enough of an origin story?
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I appreciate the deep dive there, because there, you've obviously really worked hard to get where you are today, and I love that, and that's really the reason the show exists, is to inspire, especially those up and coming, design superheroes, as I fondly refer, because and you've written articles, a lot of articles on User Zoom and things, and I really enjoyed your article about how good UX can save lives. I feel like that's sort of like the pinnacle of opportunities that exist in this field, in my opinion. When you can save a life through good design, that's a pretty big deal. And so I think that was the first thing that actually kind of drew me to you. I saw your article there. I was like, we got to talk, because I love psychology too. And it's really been more of a recent foray for me, to be honest with you. And it all started with just by reading some books. And just getting really excited about the human brain and human behaviors. And there's so many parallels to human behaviors and design and effectiveness of design and of course, or not. Well, let's talk about human factors, because I feel like that's kind of one of those less used phrases in our field, but yet it's really like UX, the whole discipline and practice, it stems from human factors discipline and study. Can you talk about that? What is human factors?
Yeah, definitely. I had a feeling that question was coming.
Good.
So yeah, and in fact, there have been a few talks recently that I give to UX crowds, where I include a slide that's kind of like the history of UX, or at least one like branch of it. And I talk about human factors, really starting from like the Industrial Revolution, where researchers first started thinking about humans as part of a system and wanted to make them more efficient.
Can I stop you there real quick?
Oh, yeah.
Can you go, because I actually saw your talk recently, the one that's on, I found one online actually, and this might be the one you're referring to, where you do talk about the history of human factors, and you mentioned the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And every time I think of the beginning of user experience design and or human factors as it was known then, I think of Alphonse Chapanis and his work in aviation, which was incredible, by the way. So that's kind of, for me, that's where the timeline always began for me. And then when you mentioned the Industrial Revolution, it really perked me up. I was like, oh, I want to ask her, I want to learn more about that. Like, tell us more about like how human factors started even then. Because we're talking 100 years ago plus.
Yeah, definitely.
Right?
I think the talk you're referring to is from an event called UX Burlington, which was in Burlington, Vermont, put on by a company. That's
the one.
Yep, called Crowdproof, and that was a really great event for anyone who's in the Northeast or wants to travel there. That I was very, very impressed by that event. But yeah, so I think in grad school when we learned about human factors, and my program was actually human factors and ergonomics. So ergonomics is two things. Either it's kind of like the British or European term for human factors, or it's like the physical part of it. So one way I can explain human factors is that, most people are a little more familiar with the term, or a lot more familiar with the term ergonomics, because we're familiar with, ergonomic chairs and desks and laptops,
lawsuits,
keyboards. Well, exactly. So ergonomics means you're designing something to fit the natural human body.
Yes.
Is what that means. So you don't want to strain it. You want things to fit the way the body's built. And human factors is really the same thing, but for the way your brain works. So you are designing things to fit how people think. So the way their brain fits into whatever you're designing. And sometimes that clicks for people because you can relate it to stuff you've physically seen and used that's ergonomic and think, oh, okay, same thing. Body-brain connection. I get it. But yeah, the Industrial Revolution is when what are called time and motion studies started. So, for example, researchers watched men shoveling coal, and determined that there was an optimal weight for how much coal should be in the shovel so that they are as fast and efficient as possible. So it's a lot of mathematics. It's not really thinking of people as like human beings with feelings or anything, but it's just thinking like, well, as part, we want to shovel as much coal as possible. Here's the person doing it. It might as well be a wheel and a cog, but they're a person. So then they designed a shovel that would hold that optimal amount of weight so that they were getting the output they wanted. So this is kind of a trend for at least the first bunch of decades of ergonomics and human factors, and the roots of that is just like, how do you design something so that the person works better in the system? And you mentioned aviation. Well, that's where it kind of exploded in World War II times, was how do we design, say, an airplane cockpit so that pilots are able to use it without crashing? So up until that point, it was kind of engineers would build things, and then it would be up to training. It would be up to the people to learn how to use whatever it was. So there wasn't really a whole lot of forethought about, how do we design this best? It was just, we're going to build this and you're going to learn how to use it, even if the dials make no sense, even if the information you need to look at the same time is in two opposite sections of this thing, you're going to learn. So again, it was kind of for efficiency and safety that people even started considering the person as part of the system and designing for them. And of course, as technology evolved and as we got software and the World Wide Web and mobile phones, it's all evolved with it. And now we have UX, which in my mind is more about the subjectivity involved. So it's thinking of people as actual people. So you want them to not just be efficient, but you want them to enjoy what they're doing, or at least not hate it.
Yeah. I think of Henry Ford too. I'm sure there was a ton, and again, it's probably not reported as much, but one can only guess at the efficiencies that they were striving for. I mean, he even had efficiency experts that would go around. This is a true story because I've read about this. They would go around the factories and they would just have their clipboards in hands, and they'd be like the two Bobs. You remember in Office Space, the two Bobs that were just kind of always looking at people to see if they were contributing enough, and nobody wanted the two Bobs in their meeting. But he had hired people that actually were called quote-unquote efficiency experts. And so no doubt that was to make sure that they were adhering to the user experience that they established for building vehicles and on the assembly lines and such. One of my favorite stories related to that was whenever this efficiency expert would always walk by this one office. He would always walk by, and he would see this fella with his feet up on the desk, looking out the window, and he this happened like multiple times, and he finally reported it to Henry Ford, and he said, "Yeah, there's a problem. This guy, whatever so and so, he sits in his desk all day with his feet up on the desk and is looking out the window. He's not doing anything. Like, what's up with this? I think he should be fired, that guy." And then Henry Ford said, "Oh, that guy. Yeah, you know what? He once had an idea that saved me millions of dollars, and he thought of it in the same position."
Oh my God.
Isn't that great? That is a true story, and I love that. It's a good reminder for all of us to to slow down a little bit. I mean, I think some of our best ideas can come and only come when we actually put our phones down, put our screens away, and go for a walk and get away and
definitely
unplug. And I think
when you
that's
give
story
space,
is so relevant.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, I getting off on a tangent there, but I just love that.
Yeah.
So human factor. So that's really, I love how you said that. That's it's sort of like what we look at as physical ergonomics. It's like that for the brain. I love that. That is so important in our field today. I feel like there's so many experiences that are unleashed upon society that it almost appears as if nobody that created the thing ever used it. Or even considered human factors, or considered other humans in this thing. Does that bother you? Do you have any thoughts on that, on how that happens and why that happens so often?
Yeah, I mean, and of course that bothers me. Of course, it seems like something that's common sense to us because it is, but it's really not to everybody. A lot of times people just want to get products out the door, like they want to be the first to market in a specific area. and they just don't have time or resources, they believe, to take care of something like the user experience, when in fact that should be the backbone of what they're actually building, right? So, I mean, it stems from a lot of things too. I mean, the term UX being thrown around, people not really knowing what it means, but knowing that it's kind of a Silicon Valley buzzword contributes to that. And when you've got people, quote unquote, practicing UX who don't really have much of a research background or psychology background or an appreciation for that, can kind of cheapen what the field seems to be, right? Because if you've got if you've got people not representing us too well, I guess is the nice way of saying it, it kind of dilutes things.
Interesting. I just launched an episode with Alan Cooper, and I just put a tweet out there. I try to grab some kind of quotable tweets out there to promote the episode, and the one that he retweeted was today. That obviously got a lot of traction after he retweeted it. It was a quote from him, but I loved it. He said something to the effect, we're talking about bad products. Why do they exist? And he said the reason so many bad products exist is that the people making bad products don't want to make good products. They want to get promoted to VP.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. I listened to that episode the other day, and that hit me too. I was like, man, yeah, you want to rise up, right? You want to, you're not doing production work anymore. You're not doing the research part anymore. That gets passed down further and further.
Yeah, and it's sad because I understand wanting to succeed, and obviously we need to make money, and the cost of living and everything, it keeps going up, and it's a problem if our salaries do not. So I get that, but I'm frustrated when greed is at the focal point of building products. When greed or status or things like that, because then who gets forgotten? The users, the people that the product was intended for, intended to help, right? And of course, there's probably designers that are lower on the totem pole that know that they're shipping crap that's gonna be unethical and things like that, and probably having a lot of moral crises. I think it's just a real shame, and I feel like I want to see a movement, and I hope that even Alan's episode will kind of start more conversations around that problem, and especially that stems out of Silicon Valley.
Yep, exactly. I mean, there's people, it's the Ian Malcolm Jurassic Park thing, where are you spending so much time thinking about whether you can do something? Are you stopping to think about whether you should? Or in a UX sense, how? What's the best way? And what are the implications of what you're building, Yeah,
exactly right. I want to take a step back. You mentioned about sort of the practicing of this field, and of course, I especially have a heart for newer designers. I feel like a beginner. God, I've been doing this for 25 years. Of course, different forms of this. It's evolved. It used to be web design when I started. Yep. So I still feel like a beginner, and I guess that's what makes me qualified to host this show, because I especially have a heart for newer designers that are jumping in and trying to navigate. This is it just gets more crazy and more evolved, seems like every day, quite frankly, and right. And so I want to jump back a few steps when you were talking about kind of, there's, unfortunately, sometimes UX gets a bad name, and I know that that's sometimes it could possibly be with newer designers that maybe were just followed their gut, made a decision, maybe it wasn't the best one. I'm sure that can happen. These are all assumptions, of course. Yeah. But I think that maybe one of the biggest problems that occur, and please feel free to correct me or add on to this, is in design, is that when we don't research enough, and we don't kind of get to know the audience that it's intended for. How do we find people? How do we find the people that we're designing for to talk to and research with? What are your best tips for those things?
That can be definitely a challenge. I mean, and I do want to backtrack and say that I think anybody trying to do UX, I definitely commend that. I love, we need to be more user-centered in general. And if people don't feel like they're doing it exactly right, there's no exact right way of doing it. You just get out there and learn and keep going. But iterate. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Iteration's the key to everything, right? Yeah. And it's something I even struggle with in my day job. So I'm the UX designer for Agrilist, which is a really great company and a really great product. We create software for indoor farmers to help them track their crops and operations, which is a great space to work in, by the way, because sustainable food production is really important right now. At the rate we're going, we need some real food solutions or we're not going to be able to feed our population in a few years.
That's a bit scary.
It is a bit scary, or it would be scary if it weren't for the fact that there are people doing really cool things with indoor growing technology. So you can create a lot of food pretty quickly year-round using indoor growing technology. But anyway, that means the users...
I love that you said that real quick. I love that you kind of... because when I first saw indoor farming, I was going to say, should I put air quotes next to that?
Yeah.
But no, I know that's only a small portion, and and certainly that's that's not. I don't think that's going to help our civilization survive as much as what you guys are doing with focusing on food. So anyway, thanks for clarifying.
We do,
Sorry
we do focus on food. We do have some of those customers as well elsewhere in the world.
No judgment.
Absolutely. A lot of valid reasons for that. But our focus is on growing greens mostly. Healthy foods in places that are considered food deserts, right? So if you live inside a city, you might not have access to fresh food. So anyway, users, no, that's completely fine. The users of our product are farmers, right? They're growers. So that's not an example of a product where I can just take it to Craigslist or take it out to Starbucks and like get guerrilla feedback on the fly, right? Like they have to actually be people who understand the industry and know what they're talking about to give any feedback that makes sense. So for that, I rely on our existing customers, which is not ideal from like a strict research perspective, but from a user feedback perspective, it absolutely is, because they're the people who I want to talk to. They're the people who are already using the product and know what they need from it and might not be getting, or know what they like and want to let us know.
Right.
So yeah, it can be really hard if you're working on something that's a little more of a general product. I've gotten research participants, and I say that, but sometimes it's a lot less formal than that. It's just more like conversations, which is also fine. From Twitter, from Facebook, from walking around a campus, people are there. I mean, depending on like your budget and how much time you have and what your research goals are, you can get a lot of feedback quickly, inexpensively, and it's as valuable as you make it. So if you know what's important to get feedback on, and you kind of like focus on that and use that to your advantage, you can get pretty far on not a whole lot.
That's fascinating. What about because you have to again know where these people are, right? I mean, a lot of people are on Facebook because even though they hate it, like influencers even are on Facebook because they go where the people are, right? That's the whole thing. I just go where the people are. I'm kind of a contrarian, I guess. Like I just deleted my Facebook account. Like I choose to not use that channel because I just don't like Mark Zuckerberg very much. Mm-hmm. So that's just me personally. But I think you have to know where the people are. Do you have tips for kind of discovering that? I'm sure like if you dig into the marketing team, like what's the email list even like for our customers that we can hit up for surveys or like to come in and test stuff? Like, do you have like some input on that, like on finding where your people are?
Ask around, and depending on what it is, like I've found people through like sometimes there's Reddit groups that are specific to like what you're researching. I mean, every product is so different. It's a little bit hard. But just ask around also, like, who do you know who's interested in this, or who do you know who kind of like fits this bill? And like I said, if you're doing in-person feedback, you can even use Craigslist, and
interesting.
I think the key, no matter how you're doing it, is to have a good screener in place. And by that, I mean kind of just a few question survey up front to make sure whoever you're contacting actually fits who you
That
want
is
to
such
talk
good
to.
advice.
Yeah, so that's
Such great
what I'll
advice.
do is if someone contacts me and they're interested in doing whatever the research is, I just send them a screener and ask them to fill that out and make sure they're a good fit. Because you want to know who you want to talk to, but you also want to know like who you don't want to talk to. Like maybe you don't want to talk to people who already use your product, or you don't want to talk to whatever the population is. And you can weed them out that way and still like appreciate, let them know, hey, I appreciate it. I'll let you know if any other opportunities come up, and then there you go. You've got an email address. But
That's great.
yeah, that is a smart tip for me.
Yeah, it is. I agree with you, and I especially love the screening them because, I mean, I think Josh Clark told a story in his episode 9 where, because I tend to ask my guests, do you have an awkward user testing story, and do you have one, Becca?
Oh Lord, I do.
Oh, good. Well, I'm gonna ask you about this, but his was interesting. Like I'm pretty sure it was his, where a homeless person came in. To try to do the test, and there was no judgment or anything. It was just kind of like, oh wow, I guess we need to kind of screen our applicants a little better, but it was neat. I mean, he took the test and he got the Amazon card or whatever it was,
right,
or the sandwich or whatever it was, and such. So, but yeah, I think that's really great advice though, because you want to make sure that you try to get the right people in for that test. And here's another thing too that might be a good tip, and I'd love you to chime in on this too, Becca. What your thoughts are on? I think Jacob Nielsen put it out there originally about the law of diminishing returns when it comes to the amount of participants in your test, and I think he says typically a 6 or 7 is enough. If you're doing I think probably more qualitative stuff. I think if it's quantitative, you might of course increase that, but qualitatively, I think you start to just get to kind of diminishing returns with 30 or 40 or 50. It's like, okay, yeah, we could have probably gotten this trend after testing the first 7 people, right? Do you have thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I find that all the time. And I come from academia where it was all about getting your effect size for statistics, and you did need a lot of people to run your stats and do your tests. But for me, usually after about 3 or 4 participants, you start hearing the same things over and over. So you have a pretty good idea of what's going to be high impact changes you need to make.
Nice.
And you don't really want to waste a whole lot of time and money on this stuff. It's better to do, rather than say testing 15 people at once, I would rather do 5, make some iterations, 5 again, make some more changes, and then 5 again. So that's what I will tell my clients when it comes to that stuff, because they don't want to pay more than they have to either.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's the law of diminishing returns on data, but also on resources with the company.
Yeah,
so
totally.
That's a good point for sure. Do you have any stories of anything crazy or super awkward that happened during user testing? Speaking of.
Yeah, I do. I told this story at the UXPA International Conference. There is typically a session called UX After Dark. Where everyone tells their most salacious stories, and mine is not like that. Oh God, yeah, dude, there's some crazy stories involving nudity and just crazy things. No. Mine's not that. All right, don't get too excited. But I had a real a hot mic issue, I'll call it, when I was doing usability testing for a pretty big project that had a lot of stakeholders, and initially they had wanted, 6 or 8 people in the room with me while I was doing it, and I said politely, I don't think that's a good idea. That's a little intimidating to have, all these white guys in suits behind people as they're trying to interact with this thing. So instead I said, all right, but I'll set up, I think it was GoToMeeting or something like that. I said, I will screen share, I will record what's happening. And you can just log in and watch, right? Without being able to interrupt or whatever. So I had my sound off, and I will blame whatever the software was. I think it was GoToMeeting, but whoever it was. I purposely went in and made it so that any guests who joined the call would be muted. I knew that was something that should be there. For whatever reason, it didn't stick. And I didn't hear it because my sound was off. So thankfully, participants heard nothing. But when I went back later to listen to the sessions, you know, and like take my notes and follow up on stuff, there was a man who had dialed in and was listening in and was not happy. I'll say that. Man, this thing was like his baby, right? And this was, usability testing was very new for them, so they threw it in very late in the process. They were ready to ship this thing, and I was finding all kinds of bad stuff. So as participants are going through and missing things, he's yelling at the screen, like, hey, it's right there. It's right, come on, it's right there. Don't you see it? Scroll down, like that, like nonstop. And I had to listen to the whole thing because I had to listen to my own interview, you know? Yeah. And I had to just pause it every, you know, minute and a half or so and just walk away and be like, all right, this is fine. At least I know what he really thinks. And even some of his comments were kind of toward me, like, come on, you got to help him out, like that kind of stuff. And I'm like, dude, this is going really well and you don't know it. So that's my only, it was very awkward, very, very awkward because I also shared the recordings with another team and I was like, listen, I'm really sorry about this. I thought I took measures to make sure this didn't happen, but it did. There's another voice on there. Just know that. Just know that. So yeah, that's my story. It was a little bit painful. So double check that you're not recording people who do not know they're being recorded.
Design and build interactive prototypes, update artwork, and test your experiences, all without having to upload, sync, or jump back and forth between apps. Adobe XD is available for both Mac and PC and integrates with Adobe Creative Cloud libraries, meaning that no matter what your team configuration, XD has you covered. And now you can get Adobe XD for free. Just go to userdefenders.com/XD to learn more. Okay. Oh, that's really funny. I wrote an article that kind of touches on something similar. It's called "User Researchers Enjoy the Silence," and it basically it has to do with just the whole premise of the horror movies, where you're watching the horror movie and you always like the protagonist, like always it seems to be like the third act where like there's nobody left alive really. It's just this one person and they run into the dumbest place, right? Like they could get in the car, they could start the car that they came in that worked perfectly fine when they got there and drive away, but they don't. They run into the barn, the dark barn, right?
And you want to yell at the screen.
You want to yell at the screen, and many people do. Like, what are you doing, you dummy?
Yeah.
Like, it's just, come on.
Yeah.
But I wrote about that and touched on how we need to just be silent, and some of the best data will reveal itself if we just embrace the awkward silences. We tend to want to kind of just cover it up and just insert ourselves and we know all the answers, so that doesn't help with data at all. It kind of ruins the test, So
I agree with that.
Great story.
So important. So you want to give people the space to feel comfortable with you. You don't want to make them feel rushed. You don't want to make them feel like they're ever doing the wrong thing. So that's why I try to fight to not have stakeholders in the room, which overall works pretty well because, I totally understand, but they have a tendency to want to jump in and help, which doesn't help anything. And then I think it might start to make participants nervous too, like they're doing the wrong thing.
Exactly. And you mentioned the white dudes with suits on, and I couldn't help but think of like the Matrix, I can just see Mr. Smith standing there with his little ear monitor, like that is intimidating stuff. Mr. Anderson, we've missed you. Great movie.
Yeah. The first one. Yeah, I agree with that.
That's really good stuff. Oh, geez, there's so many places we can go. I want to ask you, because I know you have many design superpowers, but I want to ask you, what would your design superpower be?
I had a feeling this question was going to come. And, I don't know. I think if I could narrow it down, I would say making things happen. I talked to you a little bit about making research happen on a budget and without the resources that you might want from like a usability lab or like a giant company or behind you or whatever. But usually I can get things done in kind of scrappy ways, but it kind of works out. And that's why living in Albany kind of works for me, because it's a smaller city for sure. And maybe not the most interesting or happening place to be, but I like being here because I can make things happen. Like I have connections. I'm involved in whatever things I want to be involved in, and I feel like I can really, make a difference in small ways. And that's a really cool feeling. And I would call that a superpower.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. GTD. Get things done. Or some people would say GSD. But
well, yeah.
Show,
not on this show. We don't say that.
That's right. And if you did, I would do a kapow.
I know. I'm trying not to make you do that.
So let's talk about your design Kryptonite. Like what, you obviously get crap done, but what kind of what holds you back in this field? What's your design Kryptonite?
There's a few things I could talk about. I would say, and it probably falls a little bit under imposter syndrome, like a lot of things do. But when I get pressed too hard on things, sometimes I get a little bit defensive and more like shoot from the hippie, like. To be honest, yeah. Because UX is hard in that there is still some subjectivity involved. There's still some kind of calls you make and you don't know if it's the right thing. You have data to support you, hopefully, and, some intuition, but that's not enough. Whereas, when I was in more of a academic setting and my research was scientific, it was more about like, well, I can confidently say based on my results, based on my statistics, that such and such and such and such, which in a way was like more of a safety net. Whereas in a design setting, it's a little more difficult, right? So when people actually push back at me, sometimes I don't always handle that the best. Not that I get crazy or anything, but I'm just like, either I say, all right, yeah, maybe you're right. I don't know anything, I guess. Or I'm like, well, I know what I'm talking about and you don't, kind of thing. So something I'm actively working on is just like, and my boss at my job, the CTO of the company, he's like, yeah, it's awesome. That's fine. Just, you don't have to like respond to people right away. Like, because we're a remote team, so we communicate in Slack. We have calls every day and stuff, but a lot of stuff happens in chat form, and I'll want to like respond right away. And he's like, you can just say, hey, I'm thinking about it, and then come back to it in like 10 minutes, And that's something that I'm learning, as like I'm getting better at the career I'm building. I'm like, well, all right, this is important to be able to not get defensive, and just realize that, well, maybe I didn't quite communicate something as well as I could have, or maybe, people don't always read the things you put out, they're not going to read, even if it's like a 1-page brief, people won't always read it. So it's not personal. I think sometimes it's easy to take things personally in this field compared to some other ones, just because we have to fight so much for so many things. And I think it's something where a lot of people think they can maybe quote unquote do UX. It seems like something that, isn't hard, I guess, to some people. So it's easy for people to criticize some of my work as opposed to like a software developer's work, where if you're not a developer, that seems crazy hard. Like, I'm not going to question that.
Yeah. Becca, thanks for your vulnerability in that. I feel like that is an issue that every creative person struggles with.
Yeah.
Every single one. And I'm so glad to see the conversation coming into the forefront a lot more. In fact, by the time this airs, I will have already released 2-part episode with Denise Jacobs, who wrote a book called Banish Your Inner Critic. Isn't she wonderful?
Oh, I love her. I can't wait. Yeah.
Oh, it was so good. And she is just brilliant. She just is so passionate too, like about this subject and wanting to help people through it. And it just is so clear. It comes through so loud and clear in the interview. And so, Defenders listening, if you hadn't seen that in the feed, go back and check it out. And by the time again this airs, that'll be available. And but Becca, when it comes to imposter syndrome, have you found any sort of, I guess, things that you can do or thoughts, or if you found any sort of little ways to kind of overcome that? I know that I don't think we can ever fully conquer it. That's the thing. But have you found ways to kind of help silence that voice, that unwelcome voice?
Yeah, I think just trying to separate what's legit criticism or feedback from like coworkers, for example, or clients or whoever it is from what is maybe them just not knowing what they're talking about. But that's an important skill, right? Is to understand, like, you can pull pieces of information from feedback that is useful, even if it sounds like it's not, even if it sounds like they've completely misunderstood something or whatever. There's always something that you can improve. And I think actively working on improving the things that maybe you feel you're not great at, or you're not great at, kind of helps. Because not everyone is going to be perfect at everything. And that doesn't mean you're an imposter. It just means you're being honest with yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice. And I think that it's also knowing that you are an expert at what you're doing. And, right. It's knowing that and being confident enough in your skills to know that the person that is giving you that feedback, just give them the benefit of the doubt that they just don't really know exactly what they're saying sometimes. And here's another piece of feedback that I got from Denise in that talk. And I love this. She says, "You are not your work." I like that.
Yeah, that's a big one, because I think it's easy for us to get our self-esteem kind of tied up in what we're producing, because we feel so strongly and passionately about what we're doing, but that's not who you are. Yeah, of course. But that's also not who you are. So if there's a setback in your career, or you get a rejection from something, that's not you. That's just whatever you produced. And you've produced a lot of other things that are amazing. So just keep some perspective.
That's really great. I'm huge on personal growth. And when I'm in my morning routine, it's been so fluctuating since my accident. I had an ankle surgery in May.
Yeah.
It's been so fluctuating. So I haven't been able to really do it as much. But when I'm doing it, one of the first things I do is I do a journal. And some would call it the 5-minute journal, where I list, I list 3 things I'm thankful for. And I list 3 things that I'm hoping to accomplish today, and then I do like an affirmation. I do like kind of a self-affirmation on there, and it may seem cheesy and it may be hard to do, especially if you're kind of uncomfortable like talking about yourself. But this is for you, and I just recommend, I think that so many of us, especially some of the biggest imposter syndrome sufferers, I think they just kind of forget about all the wins. I think they forget about all the cool stuff they've done and contributed. And I think that this could be a way to kind of log that stuff. And when you're feeling discouraged, and even if it's not in a journal, like put it in an Evernote doc, put all of it in one page. That might even be better, because then you can, when you're feeling discouraged, when you're feeling like shut down or whatever, and like you're no good, go and read those things, and put a date on it. Like, this day is when I did this, that day is when I did that, and look at and here's the result of what happened with that. I think that would be really good, Defenders, to do that, and just keep a win journal, right?
Oh, yeah. Some people also will, like, when they get compliments, will write those down. Or, like, if you get a nice email from someone, save that. If you get a nice thank you from someone, just so you can remember that, like, maybe on the hard days you forget that people do really appreciate what you do and value you and all of that. Yeah.
I know you've surrounded yourself with people that have helped you get where you are, but I know you've also achieved a lot on your own. So I want to ask you, what would your UX superhero name be?
I think I would be something like the synthesizer. Although I think having doctor in my name would be cool, but that doesn't, doctor synthesizer's like too much of a mouthful. So yeah, the synthesizer, I think, because I am really good at taking information from different spots and synthesizing it together. So part of that definitely is from learning those skills as a PhD student. And it's just something I kind of am naturally good at, I think, because my interests are also super varied. So instead of being like really good at one specific thing, I kind of just know at least somewhat about a ton of things. So I can pull information together, whether that's research information or whether it's just like different ideas, combining them together. And I think that would be me as a superhero, a UX superhero.
I love that. I love the synthesizer. That sounds awesome too.
It sounds really cool. Yeah.
And it has a great meaning.
Yeah.
I dig it.
It's like
that is so cool.
creating something from other things, right? Yeah.
I love it. And you know what? I noticed that about you too, because when I was researching you and looking at some of the talks you've done, and I could see like that you're really good at pulling kind of a through line into your talks and into your presentations. I saw one that I was actually kind of surprised to see, because I haven't seen a lot of your articles where you touch on this, but it's, kind of the robotics thing and the AI kind of that's I'm getting a little bit concerned about where we're heading with AI, and I'm starting to agree with Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking, and which you brilliantly pulled into this presentation. There are some of their quotes that this may not be a good thing when machines can self-replicate, intelligent machines can self-replicate and actually make their own decisions. This could be a problem. And then what I learned, I think my biggest takeaway that I had never heard before until I read that, was about Isaac Asimov's. Who was an author of old, his 3 laws of robotics. I never heard that. That was incredible. And by the way, I'll link to that, Defenders. I'll link to the 3 laws. But it says robots cannot harm humans. It basically says that in 3 different ways, 3 laws in 3 different ways, which is really incredible. And I think that is more relevant now than it ever was before when he even wrote that.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. So that's like, I gave that talk a few years ago. I've like stopped. It's become overwhelming to like try to keep up with that, like everything happening with that. But in general, yeah, I'm also worried once we have artificial intelligence that is so intelligent that it's self-aware, and actually we have that, but like emotionally self-aware and everything, like we really need to start considering the rights of robots, because at what point are they different from humans at that point? If they're actually feeling emotion, for example, so do we. And what's the difference then? One was created evolutionarily and the other created also evolutionarily, but just really, really fast.
That terrifies me, and I think that the difference, I guess the big difference to me is that the robot was manufactured, and so everything that a robot may quote unquote feel has been, pardon the expression, but synthesized, right? It's been completely manufactured. And what concerns me the most is that I don't care how on the outside a robot can like move their eyebrows and stuff like that. It's never going to have genuine empathy for humans, ever. Yeah. And that concerns me, because it's, over time, I think we may start to be convinced that they are, but it's not true. So yeah, I was I'll have to say, like, I can tell that you were able to synthesize information quite well, and kind of extract some really interesting stuff into what you're sharing. So keep doing that. I think that's awesome.
Thank you so much. That's nice of you to say.
Absolutely. And this is a fun one too. And I kind of want to caveat this question and maybe even start with another question. This is about users. Mm-hmm. And I read one of your articles just this morning, actually, about should we call them users still? Is it inappropriate? And you have a video in there that I hadn't seen before from Donald Norman, and this is going back to 2008, I believe, is what it was, and he's at some sort of conference, and he's like saying, I think we need to stop calling them users. Mm-hmm. that makes us out to be overlords, and separates the humanity from who we're designing for. And I kind of disagree with that. I know Donald, he's one. I mean, and certainly I respect the guy tons, because he really was one of the, I think probably the father of UX as we know it today. But I would say that I know that he's also kind of a sensationalist, and I think he likes to kind of be a contrarian too, which I can appreciate also. But I just feel like, when you're having conversations, and I'd love your perspective on this, Becca, but when you're having conversations as in a design team and stuff, it's just easier to say users.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean we have to feel above them. I think if somebody feels if a designer is feeling like an overlord over a user because they use the word user, I don't think the problem is that they're using the word user. I think the problem is that them, that they need to kind of maybe take a step back and just kind of do some self evaluation and gain some humility. That's my opinion about it. But I just think it's easier in conversations to refer to them as users. Tron can't be wrong.
Yeah, Tron can't be wrong. That's how I kind of ended my article, was like, I think it's fine, but it's good to like reconsider, and you might be talking to people who are not using your product, and then they're not technically users, but I mean, words are hard, so whatever, it's fine. Just don't forget that they're people.
Yes.
Like, they don't just exist in the context of your product. That's what I would say about that, is just know that your product is just one teeny tiny part of their lives, and it has to fit in with it, or they won't use it,
Hello, my name is Alan Cooper. I'm an interaction designer and have been for many years. I'm the guy who wrote About Face, and I'm trying as hard as I can to be a good ancestor. You're listening to User Defenders, the podcast with Jason Ogle.
I like that a lot. And I'm going to wrangle in some psychology here. And I think that we as designers, let's make an association in our brain, if we haven't already, God help us, that users equal human.
Right. Yeah.
There, the end. So that's my little rant about that. But that the tandem to this part is one of my favorite lines from Tron was when he said, "I fight for the users." How do you fight for your users, Becca?
Well, first of all, I love Tron.
Me too.
When Tron Legacy came out, there was a time in grad school where everyone was listening to the soundtrack like nonstop in our labs, because it was so good for like getting in the zone.
Yes, Daft Punk, right?
Daft Punk, exactly.
Oh, they did such a good job on that.
I know. I love Daft Punk. I mean, old Daft Punk. Anyway.
Yeah. Jeremy Keith hates them.
Who does?
Jeremy Keith.
Oh, well, that's fine.
There's an inside joke with Brad Frost always, because Jeremy Keith's like a folky guy. He plays folk music.
Well, that's fair.
It's a little callback. That's a callback to his interview. I highly recommend checking that out, Defenders.
So I would say I fight for users. You know what? I think I do that most through educating other people, to be honest. I mean, of course, in my everyday job and my consulting, that's what I'm doing. But bigger picture, I try to educate designers and developers and entrepreneurs about usability and user research and how to do that and how you can get feedback on things and why you should. And I think that has bigger impact than just my own personal work can ever really do, because I hope that the message kind of spreads out and helps people design better and improve their processes. So hopefully that's working. That's my goal.
I believe it is.
And like
this
you
is
said,
another example.
Of what?
Of teaching, of educating.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I like to write articles, like you said, that usually are geared a little bit more toward like beginner designers, or I should say beginner UX practitioners, to help orient them to things they should know.
Absolutely. And Defenders, check out Becca's writing. I'll be sure to link to it in the show notes. But she really has a way of breaking down some very complex subject matter into really practical, understandable terms. I think that's another one of your superpowers, Becca, for sure. And I guess that is, you said you synthesize things. I think that is an example of that. So be sure to link to that and check those articles out. They're really good.
Oh, thanks.
So let's wrap up the show with the imparting of superpowers. What is one habit that you believe contributes to your success?
I think supporting others actually contributes to my success a lot. So people who I respect and admire, people doing good things, groups doing good things, initiatives, just trying to help other people shine actually helps me out in the end a lot. Not like in a 1-for-1, like, I'll promote you, you promote me kind of thing.
Sure.
But if you help other people do the things they're good at, eventually that might help you out in ways that you weren't expecting, and it helps me kind of gain appreciation for some of the things other people are doing. Here's an example, actually. I have been supporting a local nonprofit for a while called Albany Can Code. And their mission is to create a job pipeline for software developers in the capital region of New York, where we have not a lot of them, really. And there are people who are fully capable of becoming a developer, but just don't know how. So it's instead of, getting a degree in computer science or whatever, it's these practical, shorter courses that help you learn what you need to know to get a developer job, a starting developer job. And I've loved them and supported them forever. I've spoken on panels for them, and I'm actually now taking one of their courses as a student.
Very cool. Wow.
To learn some front-end development stuff so I can, maybe not become a developer myself, but understand HTML and CSS and that kind of thing a little better so I can collaborate better with other people. But that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been aware of the good things they were doing in the community and trying to just help them out however I could.
Oh, that's so cool, Becca. I love that. And I there's a couple of thoughts that I had in this. There's the rule of reciprocity, of course, that when you do something for somebody else, they naturally want to do something for you. But I love that's not at all your motivation in this. You just really genuinely like to help other people. But something crazy happens when you help other people. They want to help you.
Yeah,
it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, well, sometimes, unless they're jerks. Right? But I love what the great Zig Ziglar said. He said, you can have anything in life you want if you'll just help others get what they want.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah, I love that.
So what's your most invincible UX resource or tool you can recommend to our listeners?
Well, there are a few things I recommend to people when they contact me and maybe they might be interested in first getting involved in UX. One of those is there's a Slack channel for Mixed Methods. I don't know if you're familiar with that podcast.
I'm not.
But there's a lot of researchers and UX people in that Slack channel, and they're very, very supportive. And there are a lot of postings for internships and stuff, and it's really cool stuff that you don't really find other places. And like a lot of Slack channels, it's also a place where people share articles they're reading or whatever, ask questions, ask for help on different things, and it's a nice group of people, and that's a very welcoming space. So I do recommend that as a resource. I also sometimes recommend people check out the Interaction Design Foundation courses. So it does cost a little bit of money to become a member of the Interaction Design Foundation, but once you are, you have access to online courses that are related to user experience, research and design, and some cool topics, getting into virtual reality and some more niche things. But I find that those courses are very well designed. And of course, there are courses available on a ton of other platforms to look at. But I do, in particular, like the Interaction Design Foundation ones because they do talk more about the research side of things and how to do more research. So yeah, those are my suggestions for resources.
I love reading so much. I love books. I'm a very big fan of the written word. I have a feeling you are too, especially with all the reading you had to do for I don't know how many years in school, but I'm sure a lot. So I want to ask you if you could recommend one book to our listeners. What would it be and why?
Well, Don Norman has already come up in conversation, and that's a name a lot of people are familiar with. But if you haven't read it, everyone, I do suggest reading The Design of Everyday Things, which there are a lot of books out there that are more like methodology specific, which could be helpful, but Design of Everyday Things really gives you like the overall theoretical framework, I think, like in a fun way. Like he gives a lot of examples of like badly designed things to understand what UX is even about. And even when it was written, it was called The Psychology of Everyday Things, tying more into like human factors than what we would call UX now. And then the name of the book changed to match the world.
Yes.
So I always recommend that to people if they haven't read it. Some of the examples are quite outdated, which is also funny. So give that a read if you haven't.
Yeah, cool. Great suggestion. I'll be honest, I haven't read it yet, and I need to now, especially since you're not the first person that has recommended that, the first super guest that has recommended that book to me. So I'm going to read it myself. And by the way, Defenders, I have a partnership with Audible. I think that book is on Audible. I don't know if it's, Becca, is that one that you can get by with just listening to versus, or is there pictures that you need to see?
I would actually read it, yeah, because there's a lot of pictures in there of like old things.
Okay, so don't get that book, but still sign up for Audible through my affiliate link, and I get $15 and you get a free audiobook you get to keep. So if you do that, you can get a different book. There's a ton of other books in there that are really good, especially around psychology too. I'm going to put out Mindset. I love that book. That's by Dr. Carol Dweck, about our potential, that we can learn anything we truly desire to. That you can do that by going to userdefenders.com/free book. Thanks for checking that out. There's my little plug. Last question, Becca. What is your best advice? And you've given a lot already, which I greatly appreciate. I know the Defenders do too. But what's your best advice for aspiring UX superheroes?
I'm not the first to say this, I'm sure, but just start doing it. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to just start redesigning things for fun, if there's a website you hate, how could you design it better? If whatever it is, some kind of service. If you want to add a little research, like a survey, and then redesign something based on survey results or anything like that, that's a good way of getting started. If you can't quite figure out how else to get your foot in the door, it just gives you practice thinking through problems like that, and it also gives you something to point to, kind of as a portfolio piece of like something you've done, even if it's not something that actually goes into production. And you never know what could happen. Maybe those people could see it and like it. And the other thing I would say, my advice is to learn a little bit about the history of user experience. A lot of people, when they come to me for advice, there's nothing wrong with this at all, but they come to it from a graphic design background. Which is, that's absolutely great. I have so many graphic designer friends. I respect that a lot. And wanting to incorporate more human-focused design in graphic design is amazing. But just understand that there is more to it than just, wireframes and prototypes. That it is a whole way of thinking and a whole system's approach to things. And hopefully maybe you learned a little bit from me babbling about that. But definitely just read up, know where the field came from, know that it's not a brand new thing, and know that research is important to it as well.
I love it. Do you have a recommendation? Like, is there a book? Has somebody written a book that kind of touches on the history of UX and kind of how it's evolved? If not, I'm giving somebody a really good idea right now.
That is a great idea. I don't know of one, to be honest.
Okay.
I'm sure there are
Dr. Google.
Blog posts. Yeah.
Dr. Google's there for you.
Yeah. People have definitely written articles and blog posts on that. So if you just search like history of UX, I'm sure you'll find some stuff that will be helpful.
Thank you. Yeah. And I love what you said about just start. Right.
Yeah.
And Bruce Mao said, begin anywhere. That's one of his rules, that I love. He's an old advertising professional, and he wrote a bunch of rules, but one of them was begin anywhere. And I think that just applies to so many things. So defenders, if you haven't just jumped out there and just started doing something and you're feeling the imposter syndrome, just, listen to Becca's advice and just start. Just begin anywhere. And I love the idea too of like, if you don't know where to start, find something that you use all the time that you just hate the UX for, and just take a stab at reinventing that. This isn't like an official, like you don't have to say I've solved the problem, but you can say, here's some thinking that I had around this and put it on Medium. Like some of those articles I found have really gotten a lot of traction. It's neat to see, and you know what, that could be a portfolio piece. It's for a prospective employer to see how you're thinking about solving problems. So I think it's great advice, and if you do that, can you tackle Spotify first, please? Thank you. And CC user defenders. No, I love that advice. And, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to beg for permission. That's a quote by Laura Lee, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, very cool. Becca, can you tell our audience the best way to connect and to keep up with you? Because I know they're going to want to.
Yep. Find me on Twitter. I'm there pretty often. That's at Becca, BECCA _ Kennedy, KENNEDY.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you want to share before we go that maybe I didn't ask you, or just anything that's on your mind or anything like that to leave us with?
I don't think so. We covered a lot. I hope it was helpful for people. It's intimidating to be even considered in a list of people like Alan Cooper, but
oh goodness,
here I am.
Please, you are here for a reason.
Yeah.
For such a time as this, and speaking of that, I'm just so glad that you agreed to be on the show. It's an honor for me, Becca, to have you here, and you are contributing so much to our field. I just applaud you, and I just ask you to please continue. Please continue doing what you're doing, educating. There's a quote that says, when you teach something, you get to learn it twice. Mm-hmm. And so I know the learner you are, you're just contributing so much. So I thank you for that. And last but not least, I just want to say, as always, fight on, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Remember back in junior high and high school when we had to write those reports on subjects that were even less interesting than watching Olympic curling? Especially when it was on a super obscure and super uninteresting topic like feline AIDS or something. What did you do? You would hit the library, right? Or use those friggin' X-ray scrolling machines if you're my age and try to learn about something that you couldn't wait to let enough time pass to hopefully let that useless information leave your gulliver. How cool is it that those of us in a role that involves UX research, that we get to learn about things that interest us, other humans? And if you're a user researcher and other humans don't interest and fascinate you, perhaps you're in the wrong role. So it's very cool that we get to research around something that we are helping to build that could even change someone's life who uses it. I love Becca's enlightenments on doing research on a budget and getting things done, no matter your seeming lack of tools and possibly even support from others around you. Hopefully you do have the support you need in your role, but I really liked her encouragement to be scrappy. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission sometimes. Defenders, this is the last official episode of Season 5. I wholeheartedly believe that this has been the best season yet, and it just keeps getting better and better. I sound like Tim Cook, don't I? And I believe that the best is still yet to come. Thanks Adobe XD for literally making Season 5 possible, and this just in, I am super excited to announce that Adobe XD has renewed their agreement to exclusively partner with me for Season 6. And that's coming toward the end of Q1. This says a lot about you, Defenders, because of your amazing support for incredible sponsors like Adobe XD. It shows that you're taking action and you're supporting me and User Defenders podcast. You're helping to support Adobe XD as well. And thanks for doing that. And if you haven't downloaded it, please do that for free. It's actually free now. You can go to userdefenders.com/XD and get that link right to it. So yeah, this product, and just like the show, as I mentioned, just keeps getting better and better. I can't wait to talk about it and share all the new things they've added and announced just at the end of 2018 at their annual Max conference. So I want to thank Eli Jorgensen for the inspiring artwork as always, and thanks Darren Goldsmith. Darren used to help me with the show notes before he got really busy with life, and understandably so. And I couldn't pay him either then, so Darren, I'm willing to pay you again for your help with show notes. Anyway, thank you for your code wizardry and helping me get the Seth Godin episode sticky header in place. I did say that this was the last official episode of the season, but I do, as I mentioned and alluded to earlier, I have one more very, very special episode launching on November 13th before I take some much-needed vacay for the holidays with my loved ones. This is with my UX and marketing superhero, Seth Godin. It's an absolutely incredible interview, and that's all I'll say for now. Be on the lookout, and for the love of God, make sure you're subscribed to automatically receive it at userdefenders.com/subscribe. I invite you, Defenders, to keep in touch with me in the off-season through Twitter. I'm at UserDefenders. And even, please, get on the newsletter. I've been writing a little more than I used to. I even don't call it the Biweekly Bugle anymore because that was too non-committal. I'm trying to be a little more spontaneous. So you can get on that newsletter at userdefenders.com/join. I love you. Wait. That didn't sound confident enough. I love you. Last but not least, until next time, next season, fight on, my friends.